I'm Phillip Strang, and this is the stories behind the stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Hahn,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Phillip Strang.
Well, happy spring, everybody, and welcome to the Author Stories Podcast. If you go to hankgarner.com, we've got a new site design I think you're going to like. It's easier to dig through all of the archives of the show. And as always, there's a little search box on the right-hand side and a box where you can sort them in a long list, and you can find an author interview that you like. Also, subscribe to the show. There are buttons over there in the right-hand sidebar as well. If you would like to support the show, there is a link in the right-hand sidebar where you can donate to the show. If you'd like to drop something in the Author Stories tip jar, there's also a link in the top sidebar where if you would like to advertise your product or service in the show, you can do that as well. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, please click on the Amazon links in the show notes and support the authors that come on, and we do appreciate it. After our great author interview today, stay tuned at the end of the show for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Hey authors, you need an editor in your life, and not just an editor, but an editor that understands you and gets what you're trying to accomplish. That's why you need to visit my good friend Scott Woodley at marlowemoss.net and let him take a look at your work. He'll give you a free sample edit. Scott can help you be the best writer you can be. Visit him at marlowemoss.net. Inspired sentences and polished paragraphs for print-worthy books at competitive rates and always on time. Offering a full range of editorial and ghostwriting services to self-published and traditionally published authors. Turn your ideas into words and see your dreams become books. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Phillip Strang on the show with me today. Phillip has a brand new book. It's only been out a couple of weeks now when we're recording this. It's called Death by a Dead Man's Hand, a new book in the DCI Tremayne Thriller Series, and we're excited to talk about it today. Welcome to the show, Phillip.
Thank you, Hank. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you here. Thank you for doing this with me today. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
It's probably not that long ago, really. I really only started writing novels about 3 to 3.5 years ago. And then that was only instigation of my wife and daughter, who said I should sit down and write about places I've been to and people I've met over the years. But once I started, I found I could graciously ever since.
I lost you there for a second, Phillip. You said once you started.
Yes, I'm not sure. The connection seems to be going up and down a little bit.
Yeah.
But once I started, I continued to write voraciously. I found that I enjoyed it, and I could do it, and it occupies my life these days.
Isn't that wonderful? So you said that only the last few years have you been novel writing, but did the thought ever occur to you before then, or were you a voracious reader before then? And if so, what sorts of things did you really love to read?
Well, I certainly read a lot. I mean, as a child and as a teenager, it would have been science fiction, but over the latter years, it would have been thrillers or adventure books by all of the authors. So I've always read, and I've always had the ability to write. Although I did a lot of technical writing for many years as part of my career. So I did have the ability to put words on a piece of paper.
Right. Now, your accent is a little different from mine. What part of the world are you from?
I was born in England, and I grew up in Salisbury, which, if people know, is to the west of London. People don't know, it's about 8 miles from Stonehenge, which is mainly the reference point I use when I try to explain where I came from in England. So as a child, I used to cycle up past Stonehenge, or in those days there were no fences around it, so you could walk around Stonehenge. Nowadays, I'm afraid if you want to walk up to the stones, you either have to be a druid on the summer solstice or an American president.
Oh, and sometimes they're not far apart.
Oh, possibly.
Oh, I think we Americans have a real fascination with Stonehenge and with England in general. And I've had this conversation before with some of my friends from the UK, that as in America we're a young country, and so we're kind of have an adolescent view of history because we just don't have much of it, and then you guys have 1,000 years of history. And growing up near Stonehenge in particular, or such a rich, deep history, does that occur to you when you're growing up there, and does that affect you in your storytelling at all?
It certainly affected me growing up because I was interested in it, and I was. To a lot of people, it probably doesn't have any impact. They just accept it as being there. I mean, I've travelled to a lot of countries in the world with rich histories, and the people just ignore what's there. Exactly. But I mean, I was interested in Stonehenge. Everyone knows Stonehenge, but if you go to Stonehenge area, the place is littered with Anglo-Saxon burial mounds, stones sticking up at various places, Roman villas. All sorts of things are there. It's amazing. To me, it's amazing. In fact, it's a lovely place when the weather's nice, which is why I'm talking from Sydney in Australia.
That was going to be my next question. Is your accent has taken on a little different inflection because I don't think you live there anymore, do you? So how long have you been in Sydney?
Nearly 50 years.
Wow. So
if I go to England, they pick it up. If I'm in Australia, they pick it up as an English accent.
And you're somewhere in the middle, aren't you?
Well, very much so. But I mean, I for all intents and purposes, I consider myself an Australian. Except when I travel, I'm glad that I can carry 2 passports, one Australian and one English, which means you can basically go anywhere without visas or any hassles.
Right. So you said that at the encouragement of your wife and daughter, you started collecting some of your stories, people that you've met and places you've been. What was that first instigation? What was that first story that you decided to tell?
Well, they weren't crime thrillers at all. I mean, they were basically books related to terrorism. Not so much terrorism, but I mean, I'd been into a lot of places which most people would regard as, if not war zones, not far off. I spent the last 20 years or so traveling around the world building cell phone networks. I say cell phone networks for the American audience because in Australia we'd call it mobile phones. So I ended up working in the Caribbean. I ended up working in Pakistan and Afghanistan and large parts of Africa, purely as a civilian, building mobile phone networks, cell phone networks. So I'd been to these places, and so I ended up over a period of time meeting warlords in Afghanistan, politicians in Pakistan, and then I met a myriad of in Liberia and West Africa and Senegal and wherever else. So when I started writing, putting pen to paper, it just flowed out of me. I could sit here of a day and write 10 to 12 words. And that lasted for a long while. And, of course, then I started to exhaust that. And I certainly don't write that many words a day nowadays.
So how did you get into crime fiction?
Well, I mean, I've come up writing. Once I started writing, once I went through very quickly realizing that I was not going to write the great novel first off a million copies, I then started to analyze the market. And I realized that if you want to make good money writing, you need to understand how the market works. You need to understand the genre you need to write in. You need to understand how to promote yourself. You need to know what is required to do this properly. So I started doing research, and I realized that writing about British crime detectives, murder thrillers, was an immensely popular category. And there's some big hitters in there, so you're not going to somehow magically get the keywords to put you in those sort of categories. That's not possible. So I chose, British crime detective thrillers. I certainly know England, and I certainly know London, and I just started writing one, and I went from there.
Now, did you? Was there any specific research that you had to do? I know that you knew the setting and the place, but what about the inner workings of the detective department and the law enforcement? Was there any specific research you had to do to get up to speed there?
Well, yes, but we have the internet and we have YouTube, and if you go on YouTube, you can find a homicide department in England and about 10 interviews or 20 interviews. They go through the whole workings of it. You can go out on patrol with the police on YouTube. I also found a free course with an English university on forensics. They find a skeleton in a park, analyze, they find out the sex of the body, they find out the height and the weight and the history, and follow it through to conclusion as to finding who the person was and who the murderer was. And that was a free course from a university in England, and I did that. So I learned enough about forensics from that, how to age a body, how to find out how tall the body is, and so on and so on. And from then on in, I just kept writing. And if I get to a point where I'm lost as to the forensic science, I just put 3 question marks and keep writing. And then I go back and research the subject. I mean, we with the internet these days, we don't need to go to these places. Google Street View means I can literally drive down any street in the world.
Right. Well, I think that's a very handy tool to find some way to text. You use 3 question marks. Some people will, just put, research in brackets or something. Something that you can search for later and find every occurrence in your document. But what that does is allow you to keep the momentum of the writing going and not get bogged down by endless Google searches and eating up your writing time.
I try to keep writing. The more I write, the more critical I become of my writing. So I don't sit there and bang away at the keyboard for endless hours on end. I'd like to, but I mean I find I can't in that way nowadays. But I write every day, and I always try to make a specific word count. Now, up until the last few months, that would be 5,000 a day, but I've cut that back to about 3,000. Primarily because I feel I need to improve on the quality of my writing with every book I write, and there's a little bit more care. So but I still write every day. every day. It's the only way to do it. It's the only way to improve, and it's the only way to maintain continuity in the book as well.
Right. Well, it sounds like you put a lot of thought and research into the state of publishing before getting into it, and I really like that. There's a couple of camps that are at odds with each other a lot of times, and one said that you should research your market and write to market. Because if you're not writing to a market, no one's going to read your work, and then you've just wasted everybody's time. And then the other folks say, well, this is, and it's by writing to market, you're sacrificing the story, and it's just going to be pulp, as if pulp is a bad thing. I tend to fall in that first camp, that if you're not writing stories that people want to read, then it's just an exercise in futility.
Well, yes, but I am writing books that people want to read. The majority of my books are actually sold in America, of course. But I mean, people seem to in America seem to like the English quaintness and the way that England is. But regardless, I am writing to market. I am attempting to write art and the very best books I want to write. Of course, the problem is if you become a purist and say, I am not going to release mine until it's the very best book that there is, it's a great book, everyone loves it. Well, yes, this is all very nice, but the problem is, unless you're lucky, you won't make any money.
Right. That's right.
I mean, to me, it depends what you want. If you want to be, if you want to write and publish a book purely because it drives you to do it, great. But don't expect to make money from doing that unless you're very lucky. If you want to write and make an income, well, then you need to follow in part what I'm doing. If you want to make a good income or make a lot of money, well, then you need to understand how the market works. But at the end of the day, you still need the drive and the wish to write. You can't sit there in isolation and say, well, I'm going to write 10 books and each book's going to make me $100 a week. The hours that you will need to spend to do that, there's no way you can get around the fact that the very best writer is going to write 1,000 words a minute, put in about 60 to 100 hours just to write the first draft, and then there's the editing and so on. So you have to enjoy the process. You have to enjoy writing.
Well, and the readers can tell if you enjoy it or not. That's why I think it's a false dichotomy when we talk about writing to market or writing for the art of it, because when you do write to market and you're doing something that you enjoy and you know that your readers enjoy, then it becomes a completely new experience for everyone involved. And that's why I don't like those arguments, because I don't think they hold water. If you're doing what you love and you're getting better at it, and audience that likes what you're doing, then that's the best you can hope for.
Well, yes, I would agree that my first attempts at writing are probably not as good as they should be, but I believe that the current books I'm writing are entertaining reads with very few grammatical errors, and there may be a few in there. Certainly the forensics and the police procedurals are okay. I never receive any comments from an ex-policeman saying you got this wrong. I mean, no one does that at all. So I am conscious to write better books all the time. But it seems to me that if you want to be successful as a writer, I mean, there's three ways you go about it. You either write one book which is unique in itself and takes off, and it does happen, not often, but we all know of instances where it does. You're either pretty and you release a cookbook at Christmas and sell 10 million copies, or you do what I do. You analyze the business. You understand the market, how Amazon moves, how Facebook ads operate. and do that. But I'm still doing something I enjoy. that entertained.
Right. I think that's a good policy that make your sentences matter.
Yes.
Instead of count so much. Do you feel like that it's important to have that time between writing sessions? I know you said you write, and I'm a big proponent of getting into that writing habit and making it. That's the only way for your skill to improve is to keep at it. But shorter writing bursts, and then taking the rest of the day before coming back tomorrow. Do you think that time off between writing sessions helps to work out some of the maybe story? I don't want to say problems, but keeps the story flow going and keeps you on track.
Well, very much so. I will only ever write in the morning. I found that's how it works for me. Certainly last year when I published 8 months last year, and I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and then writing until 10 or 11, whatever was necessary. I haven't been doing that so much this year, and not the 4 o'clock starts, but I'll still get up around 5 o'clock every day and write. And I'll probably write till about 9 or 10 o'clock. After that point in time, I think to myself, oh, well, later on I'll come back and write it. But no, that's the period, and that's it. So the remainder of the day, I will edit what I've written. It won't be the final edit, but I will go through a 3-stage process to be basically, I'll run through it with Grammarly. You've probably used Grammarly or heard of it. It's not the final edit by any means, but it does pick up quite a lot. Then I'll edit, and then I'll listen to it. There's a program called Natural Reader. You can load your program up on there, and it'll play it back to you. So I'll try that 3-stage process on what I've written for the day. That's what I've written into a reasonable condition, but and that'll be about it. I will certainly each day I will check my rankings on key books. I will check my book ads. I will check if I've picked up any new email subscribers, which are critical, but I find I'm plateauing on those. I find I can't get the numbers of subscribers to my mailing list to go above a certain number, and I'm not quite sure what to do about that at this present moment. But I won't write on the days when I'm editing. Prior to sending to a proofreader, I'll spend 2 days going through the book. I won't write at those times. I'll go through it very, very pedantically. If I have to go through the book 2, 3 times, I will. And then I'll send it to the proofreader. It comes back from the proofreader. I'll spend another 2 or 3 days while I go through what the proofreader came up with, and then I'll read it and check it again and again if I need to, and then I'll need to format for Create, sort out book covers, sort out how I'm going to promote it, send it to the mailing list. So there are days when I don't write, but I will be doing something, and that'll be the editing.
How much planning goes into your books before you start the writing? Are you an intricate plotter, or?
No, I'm not a plotter at all. What I'll do, I'll try to come up with an original idea. Not always something slightly different. What I'll do is I'll come up. I may use an article, or what I'll do is I go on the internet again. Unsolved murder mysteries, real murders that are unsolved. Find out if there's a little twist to it that you can work. Even some of those murder mystery games that they set up for people in a group and so on, sometimes they always tend to be a little oddballs. I can weave something around one of those. And for a few days, it'll sort of gel in my mind, and one will come up, and then a sentence or a paragraph will come in my mind, and I'll just write that down. But what I'll do is, as the story starts moving forward, I'll list the characters, the main characters who I know. I'll list maybe some key points in the story, and as I'm writing, situation and people and opportunities will come up, and I'll just bullet point those at the end of the page, and I'll just keep writing forward. So, I mean, when I start writing a book, I have no idea ultimately who the murderer will be, who will be murdered. On one of my books, I had a number of murders, and it was coming together, and I knew who the two people were responsible, and there within the last chapter, I realized it couldn't be them. There was just a component, which was how did they get access to this car, that they could not have resolved. So it ended up that two other people were the murderers. So it has to make sense at the end.
Well, sure. And I've heard people say that if it's not a surprise to the writer, it's a surprise to the reader. So do you find that holds true?
Yes. No, I did go through one. It's always a surprise to me because I don't know. I'm 45,000 words into another book, and quite frankly, I don't have a clue at this present moment. Not a clue. I mean, so far only one person's murdered and one person's died, but I have no idea as to conclusion. There may well be other characters that come into the story that I've not written about at this present moment, and I know this by keep writing. I'm not sure how anyone can. I'm sure people do, and people are successful. People who can plot it all the way through. I certainly can't. I mean, I can't work like that. I'd like to. I mean, it makes some sense, but I can't work like that.
Well, when you get to a plot twist, like you mentioned a minute ago, where you get to the end and the people that you think are responsible can't be responsible, I guess you're confronted with two options at that point. You could either find out who could be responsible, who would be plausibly responsible, or you could then go back through the book and edit the two people that you thought were and edit their circumstances so that they then could be responsible. It seems like the going back and editing that would be a lot more work than the way you do it.
Yeah, I've been placed in that situation before, and I've looked at it and I thought, no. The trouble is, the story has a spontaneity about it and a rhythm to it. Start changing one sentence here and there, you may lose it.
It's going to feel contrived too.
On the one time I was presented with that, I resisted it and I just kept writing forward. I mean, if you're writing the stories that I'm writing, that there's always there's enough villains around.
Right.
I mean, they don't look like villains; they look like normal people, but they've all got I mean, as I see it, every character in a book you write, the villains are villainous, and the good are flawed. So everyone's got skeletons in the cupboard. Everyone's a potential murderer. And that's how I write it. So all of the. So in the book where I got to the end and I realized these two characters couldn't do it. I mean, I had another 3 or 4 who could possibly be capable of murder, and the other 2 slotted in nicely, and that was that.
Well, do you ever find yourself, Philip, when you sit down to write there early in the morning, and you just don't know where it is today? In writing loosely the way you do, are you ever at a loss for what's coming next?
sometimes I find that when I get to about the halfway stage in the book, where most of the murders have been committed, most of the characters in place, I get to that point of not being able how to move it forward. I start writing, but it's not flowing in the way that I would like it to flow. The mind has not taken off, so I feel I'm forcing it a little bit. But yet again, you've got to keep writing. You've got to work through it, and to go away for 3 or 4 days and think about it and then come back doesn't work for me. So what I've done is, in the past, I've sat there, not writing as fast or as good as I would like to. Keep moving forward on the sentences. And sometimes what I'll find is that after I've written a few sentences, it will come back to me and I'm okay again. And whatever happens, if what I've written has moved me through that dull patch, that dead patch, onto something worthwhile, I can always go back and re-edit.
Right. Philip, what do you have coming up next? You've got the new book out that's been out a couple of weeks. What's next on the horizon for you?
I need to finish another DCI Cook book, and that'll probably take me maybe another 10 days or so. So that'll be off to the editor before the end of the month. Hopefully, it'll be back from the editor before the end of the month, but we'll see how that goes. After that, I need to write another book in the Tremayne series, which will make number 6. Then I'll make that into a box set. Now, what is remarkable is that I took the first 6 books of the Tremayne of the DCI Cook series, put them into a box set, and each day I sell that box set. I mean, I put it up at $9.99 as a box set, and each day it sells, and each day I get a lot of page reads off it. I only have a $5 Facebook ad behind it. I don't even think I need the Facebook ad, but for some reason it sells. So I want to get the Tremayne as a 6-book box set as well, because I know that will sell as well.
How far do you see these 2 6 ending?
I'm not sure. I feel at some stage they will come to a conclusion, and maybe Tremayne will go probably another few books. I can see that moving forward. I find the material richer to write with. I feel that DCI. I don't think I can write a month on DCI Cook. I mean, that's the problem. I can't be original. After that, what do I do? Where do I go? Do I go into another genre or another genre, or do I come up with another crime thriller and another DCI or a DI or whatever? I'm not sure at this point in time.
Well, I'm you next.
Well, they can certainly go to my website, which is Phillip Strang.
Right. Yeah. Too many folks talked about going wide and losing all of their momentum on Amazon, and if that's where the readers are, I'm happy to sell there exclusively.
Well, I'm part of their Select program, and I make more money on page reads than I do on sales.
Exactly.
I mean, we're putting all our eggs in one basket, but then again, when it comes to advertising, we're forced to use Facebook. I mean, is Facebook ideal? Does Facebook increase our click costs as we increase our ad spend on a particular book? Well, yes, they do. But, I mean, what's the option? I mean, we don't have the luxury of going to somewhere else. It's Facebook if you want to advertise, and it's Amazon if you want to sell. And that's it. But I mean, I see a lot of people. I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand how the market works. I see constantly. I see people saying best-selling author, and so on and so on. And then when I go on Amazon and I use a little program I've got, EP Spy, I think it's called, so you can get a rough idea of the money these people are earning, and you realise that some of them are probably earning $50 a month or $100 a month, whereas people like myself who understand how the market works and focus very much on the crass commercialization of a product understand this. So if you look at mine, I'm making money, and I watch it every day, constantly. Every day I check on it, and I make sure to continue that momentum.
Yeah, it really is something that you have to pay attention to and work it and treat it like it's any other business.
Well, I mean, if you're a purist and you want to write the great book, or if you're not au fait with data analysis and marketing and so on, well, not everyone is. Not everyone is. Now, I've reached a situation where I'm in a
Damien!" and dove from the roof, hanging herself. Buddy knew which parts he was old enough to watch and which parts he wasn't. He trusted his dad to let him know when to look again. Occasionally, his dad tricked him into peeking too soon, but that was part of the fun. They kicked their feet at the screen and shouted, "Look up! Look up! Oh, idiot! Don't get yourself killed!" At the climax, the hero of the movie, Mr. Thorne, discovered a birthmark of 3 6s on his son's head and dragged the little Antichrist to the altar of the church, determined to spear his son with holy daggers and end evil forever. After it was over, the Rittermeyer men sat silently through the credits. David put an arm around his son and ran his fingers through Buddy's hair. He wasn't searching for devil marks. He knew there weren't any. And Buddy was certain there were no daggers in his father's hand either. Those things were just make-believe. Real fathers and sons don't do bad things to each other. They were queuing up Omen 2 when the power went out. "No," Buddy whined. "Not on movie night." Daddy went to the window. "It's the whole block. Sorry, Damien. How about, scary blackout. Go get the Ouija board out of the guest room closet." "Cool. And candles." Buddy found the Ouija board, hidden under old clothes. When he shut the sliding door again, the sight of a monster startled him, and he let out an involuntary, "huh" sound. It was his own skeleton-bodied reflection in the mirrored closet door. He stared at it. He liked the effect of moonlight on his cheeks. Spectral, haunted, his eyes big and white. He clacked his teeth at himself, picturing his own grinning skull under his child's flesh, and gave an evil laugh. He was answered by a scream. A woman's scream. High-pitched and far away. One of the neighbors? Buddy dropped the Ouija board into a patch of moonlight and sat with it. "What's going on?" he whispered, his fingers on the heart-shaped wood planchette.